friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori, and today we are going to be talking about a pile of classics that I would really like to read before I die. I love a good classic novel. Some of my favorite books of all time are classics, a la Frankenstein, White Fang, The Three Musketeers, etc., etc. So I'm very excited to see if I can add some more classics to my favorites list with this stack next to me. Now for logistics, I do want to mention that I am classifying anything written generally before like the 1970s as a classic for the purposes of this video. I realize that there is a lot of nuance within the vintage slash classics slash modern classics discussion. So for the purposes of this video, we're just gonna roll with it and say anything 1970 and earlier, with most of these being written prior to the 1950s. So let's start with the first book, Giants in the Earth by O.E. Rolvag. This is a book about Norwegian pioneers settling the western frontier of the United States. I came across this book when we went on our trip to South Dakota last September and was just instantly interested because as somebody with a very strong Norwegian heritage, this is a side of pioneer life that I hadn't really dug into. I hadn't really read anything from this specific point of view about Western expansion, and because it is written from like the 1920s by a Norwegian author telling the story of Norwegian pioneers, I just think that that is super, super cool. And I'm really excited about this. It is a historical fiction that kind of details the struggles that these pioneers faced. What I'm really looking forward to about this book is seeing how, as it says in the synopsis, how it bridges the gap between the American dream and the Norwegian culture that our main characters are bringing along with them into their new lives in America. I want to read this little bit from the introduction because I think it kind of perfectly encapsulates why I'm so excited to read this. It is a unique experience, all things considered, to have this novel by O.E. Rolvag, so palpably European in its art and atmosphere, so distinctly American in everything it deals with. I feel like oftentimes when we read pioneer or Western expansion or just Western stories in general, it is very rooted in an American voice. So I am looking forward to seeing a Norwegian take on this kind of a story. Next, we are going to go all the way back to the 1700s, and one of my most anticipated classics reads, I've owned this for a while and it's kind of ridiculous that I have not read it yet. That is The Memoirs of Lady Hye-gyung, and this is translated by Ja-hyun Kim Habush, I think is the last name. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. This story follows Lady Hye-gyung, who was a mistress of the Korean court in the 1700s, and she married her intended when they were both only 9 years old. And the young prince, who became king after that, had a very troubled life and went insane, essentially. And this is her memoir of her court life, her family life, and all of the tragedies and struggles that she went through during that time period with the man she was married to, with the political intrigue that surrounded her on a daily basis. And I'm just so incredibly excited to read this book, you guys. I can't even tell you. This one is probably my most anticipated classic after War and Peace, which is what I'm reading right now. I don't know what I'm going to get to this, but I just feel like this is going to be a deeply impactful read and one that is going to stick with me for a long time, especially since I have a very strong interest in Korean history overall. So yeah, this one is number 2 on my list and probably number 1 in my most anticipated classics. We're going to skip forward a little bit farther to the 1800s Europe with Pride and Prejudice. For how much of a Jane Austen fan I am and for how deeply entrenched in the film adaptations I was growing up, they were some of my mom's favorite films. I can literally quote you the 1990s Pride and Prejudice TV series word for word from memory pretty much. I've never read the book, which is horrible, and it's like, it's one of those things where you admit on the internet that you haven't read a book that you talk about the story all the time. but you haven't read the source material. So I recognize that that is a horrible, awful thing, and I am going to remedy that very soon. I'm going to make my way through all of Jane Austen's novels. I'll be reading Persuasion very soon here, and Pride and Prejudice will not be far behind. So Pride and Prejudice has a very deep place in my heart, like I said, because it's such a nostalgic story for me. I grew up on it. You know, the stories of the people in this book are some of the most influential for me growing up as a young reader and writer. And of course, the love story between Lizzie and Mr. Darcy is pretty foundational, I think, to my standards for enemies to lovers. And I absolutely am so excited to read this. I read Northanger Abbey last year. That was my first Jane Austen read, and I loved it. And I can only imagine how much more I'm going to love this book because I have such a long and deeply fond history with it. Later on in the 1800s, we find my next classic, and that is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. This one has shot even farther up my TBR in the last couple of months because I have been reading War and Peace, and I have been absolutely loving it so far. Like, not to spoil anything, but I'm really enjoying my time with it. And so Anna Karenina is the story of a woman who is caught in kind of a love triangle. It's not really a love triangle because she's married to a man who she doesn't really love, from what I understand. And there's another person that comes into her life. And I think the conversation in this story about the way that women were often seen as objects or possessions, and their value was very closely tied to who they were married to and how many children they were able to have. I'm really interested in reading this from that perspective, just to kind of see Leo Tolstoy's take on that, especially now, like I said, after having read more of War and Peace and really enjoying his character work. One of my favorite lines that I've ever heard from a classic novel is actually in this book too, which I won't read now because I don't want to like spoil anything for you guys, but I have mentioned it in live streams and stuff before, and I absolutely love everything it encapsulates in a line. So yeah, Anna Karenina is definitely high on my list, and I'm really looking forward to, I don't know how I'm going to feel about reading another Tolstoy, like how soon I'm going to get to it after finishing War and Peace, but this one is definitely a book that will remain high on my TBR until I get to it, hopefully in the near future. This next one has kind of a funny story to it. This is Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. This book, as the synopsis says, is a compassionate portrait of a young rural woman, powerful criticism of social convention, and disarming consideration of the role of destiny in human life. This one is a book that I actually should have already read. And that's where the funny story of this comes in. So when I was in college, I was a very dedicated student. I read so many books in college, you guys. As an English major with a theater minor, my reading stack was kind of crazy going through my 4 years of college. And Tess of the D'Urbervilles was one that I chose from a list when I was in a class called Intro to Fiction with one of my favorite professors in college, and I didn't know how long it was when I picked it, and we only had like a week, I think, or so, week to 2 weeks, to read the entire book and write an essay, and I don't even remember what the topic of the essay was, but it was fairly involved, and I ran into a wall because I was overloaded with homework, and I basically skimmed through enough of the book to kind of pull a sort of essay out of the air and hand in, and bless my professor, that is the only B I think I ever got in one of his classes, and he 100% knew. Like, he 100% knew that I just totally pulled that out of nowhere, and was very gracious about it because, in fairness, I did work very hard in the class in general, but I never read the book, and I was supposed to have. So this is a book that has been so long overdue for me to read it, and I genuinely want to go back now and read it, and what I might do is actually write my thoughts out as in essay format and send it to my professor and just be like, I know this is 15 years late, but I did read this and I have thoughts on it. Thank you so much for keeping it on my radar this whole time. And this is my way of like apologizing for, you know, not putting in my best work at the time. I have heard that Thomas Hardy is an exceptional novelist, and I look forward to seeing if I agree with that. Next up is another chunk. This is another like 1,000-page classic, you guys, because I am a glutton for punishment. And that is The Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikibu. Murasaki Shikibu was actually a lady in the Heian courts of 11th century Japan. And this is an epic of the lives of the people involved in this court, with the Prince Genji, I believe, at the head of that cast of characters. And this one's gonna take me some time. And I think that this translation by Edward Seidensticker, I've heard that it's good. We'll see how I feel about it, but I am really looking forward to this. And what I love about this copy is that there's a whole bunch of like woodcut illustrations on the inside. And I think it's so amazing to be able to step back in history and see these ancient historical royal courts from the perspective of someone who was there in the moment. And that's something that I think history offers us that's so special and so cool. Obviously, it's going to have some unreliable narrator bias, of course, every book does, but I just think it's going to be a really cool look into that time period. It's going to be one of the oldest classics I will have read once I finish it. And yeah, I'm super excited about this one, but again, this is another doorstop book that it's going to take me a while. It's going to take me a while to get through it. Staying in Japan around the 17th century, we are going to go to Silence by Shusaku Endo. This is going to be a really heavy, hard read, and I know that. I've heard a lot of people who have read this say that it is a very heartrending, very confronting read. This is the story of two Jesuit priests who travel to feudal Japan, and at the time, their religion was not allowed in feudal Japan, and they were forced to, or basically given the ultimatum that they have to renounce their beliefs publicly in order to survive. And I'm not going to spoil the ending. I know generally what happens in this book, but I really want to read it. I have not watched the film that was done based on this book because I wanted to wait till I'd read the story. I think this is going to be a really heavy read, but I think it's going to be a powerful and impactful look at faith and how strong faith has to be in order to survive or to stand up against the threat of imminent death in this situation with these two characters. So I am really looking forward to this. I'm going to have to be in the right headspace for it, but this is definitely a book that I think is going to stay with me for a very long time. Next up is a book that actually was on my grandfather's list of favorite classics, and that is Scaramouche by Raphael Sabatini. And I can't remember exactly what time period this is in. I know it's around the French Revolution or leading into the French Revolution. It was published in 1921, and it follows a character named Moreau, who is raised by a godfather. He doesn't know anything about his parents. He doesn't know anything about where he came from. Eventually, he goes on a vengeance path to find and kill the murderer of his best friend. This one is very character focused. It's a deeper psychological study behind the era that was the French Revolution, and told through the lens of someone who is very deeply embedded in a lot of the intrigue and espionage of that time. And I think it's going to be fantastic. I'm really excited to read this. I know that Raphael Sabatini was a pretty prolific writer of his time, and he has a couple other books that I have on my shelves that I really want to get to. But Scaramouche is definitely the one I want to start with because I think it is his best known classic, if I'm not mistaken. So this one is high on my TBR for classics, and I'm really excited to see, to be able to read a book that my grandfather loved so much. Next up is probably the shortest book on this list, and that is All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Maria Remarque. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name correctly, I apologize, but this book is one of my most anticipated military classic reads. This story was written in the 1920s, and it is a story of a German soldier in World War I whose patriotism leads him to sign up to fight for his country in the war. And as he gets to the front lines and the trenches and comes face to face with the horrors and reality of what exactly it is he has signed up for, his psyche kind of crumbles under the pressure of that, as is completely understandable. And this is a tiny little book that packs an absolute wallop from what I have heard from the people who've read it. And the other thing that I wanted to do with this one is just read you guys there's a little kind of caption at the beginning, or author's note at the beginning of the book, that I just think is so cool. This book is to be neither an accusation nor a confession, and least of all an adventure, for death is not an adventure to those who stand face to face with it. It will try simply to tell of a generation of men who, even though they may have escaped shells, were destroyed by the war. I can't wait to read this book, you guys. I have heard nothing but huge praise for this book, and I think it's going to be a phenomenal read. It's going to be the kind of classic that will probably end up on my favorites of all time list once I have read it, and I cannot wait. And now we're going to go to post-Napoleon France with The Count of Monte Cristo. This is one of my dad's favorite stories of all time. I grew up watching the Jim Caviezel and Guy Pearce film of this book. And before anybody says anything in the comments, I'm not expecting the book to be the movie, just so we get that out of the way. But the story, like, this is the quintessential vengeance tale. I don't know that there is a more well-known and immediately present character when it comes to vengeance stories than Edmond Dantes. This is the story of a young man who doesn't have a lot of money or any title to speak of, who is engaged to an absolutely beautiful young woman that he is very in love with, and she is very much in love with him. And his best friend, not to spoil anything, but his best friend gets in the way of that. This is a really powerful story about what people will do when their mind is completely consumed by vengeance or jealousy. And I am really looking forward to reading this. This is going to be another chonker classic. I think this copy is 1,000 pages with some pretty tiny font. But I can't wait. I cannot wait to read this, you guys, because everything I have read about it, every person I've heard talk about it, this is on so many people's favorite classics list and even favorite books list. And it is just like one of the best revenge stories written ever of all time. And I think I can say that even before having read it. I do want to throw an honorable mention here on the end. So we actually have 11 books on this list, but nobody cares. And that is Watership Down by Richard Adams. This is a slightly newer, more modern classic, and it is the story of a bunch of animals, but it is basically grimdark from what I've heard. This one intrigues me so much. And I love White Fang is one of my favorite novels of all time by Jack London, and that is a story of humanity as viewed through the lens of a wild creature. And I'm anticipating that there's going to be some of that in this as well, and I cannot wait. I really want to read another book that takes that approach. It is really, really hard to pull off non-human characters and make them feel realistic and yet also different, that they don't feel human in the way that they're being written. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how Richard Adams handles that. And I think this one is going to be another one that I'm going to have to be in the right headspace for, because I have heard that this one is also a very heavy read. I realize that a lot of the books on this list are going to be very heavy reads. I tend to gravitate towards those. I don't know what that says about me, but it's okay. It's on brand. So that is officially the stack of classics that I am really, really hoping to get to in the next few years, but at least before I die, because we're just throwing a morbid bent to this. But I'm really excited about all of them. I would love to know down in the comments what your top classic TBR reads are, which ones you are most excited to read, and also let me know what some of your favorite classics are. If there are any that I need to add to my list, there's a whole bunch more on my shelves that I want to read that weren't on this list, but I would love to hear what classics you love, which ones you're most excited to read. And also check out my description box down below for links to all my social media accounts and also to my website where you can check out my fantasy novels. And I hope that you guys are having a fantastic week. I hope you are reading 5-star reads, and I will see you in the next video.